Hello. I think that ideology is something that we have to be honest about. I think that without recognizing ideology behind terrible acts, human acts, then the problem can't be tackled or can't even begin to be tackled. And it seems once again that terrorist incident is kind of being used as a bit of football by people who want to debate terminology. So, yesterday there was an atrocity in Canada, in London, Ontario, when a guy drove into a Muslim family and killed four people. It's an awful incident, particularly as it's one family impacted, and it's the worst terrorist attack in Canada since the Quebec City mosque attack in 2017. Um, Trudeau has said this shows that we cannot deny the existence of Islamophobia. Clearly, there's a problem. This is the second deadly anti-Muslim attack in Canada in 5 years, so clearly there is a problem going on there. Whether it's far-right extremism, um, in terms of there being particular websites or whatever that might be fueling this. As with every developing story, some of the details are still unclear. Um, but one of the common tropes that comes up with an incident like this, when you have um, a white suspect, as far as I know, the suspect is white, um, and the victims are a minority, then you will see this on the internet. Oh, well, he's going to be charged with mental illness instead of terrorism. This is a common conception that's come up in recent years, i.e., there's purportedly double standards. Now, um, I see where this is coming from because when there's mass shootings in the US and most of those cases the suspects are white, often mental illness is brought up as a factor. But what people need to understand is that with any act of violence, ideology matters. So I've seen on forums that I'm part of, Muslims saying, oh, this guy's going to be called mentally ill instead of a terrorist. Why is it we don't blame all Christians when there's attacks involving Muslims? Islam gets blamed. Well, that's a very manipulative take, and this is why. Firstly, we don't know if there was any Christian fundamentalism involved in this attack. I know sometimes when you get far right individuals, they might use certain Christian orthodoxy and certain historic aspects. Apparently, when Brenton Tarrant committed his outrages in New Zealand, he had put logos and sentences on his gun, supposedly from ancient battles in Europe, between Europe and the Ottoman Empire. Um, so I wouldn't totally rule it out within far right ideology to have some Christian fundamentalist ideas. However, I think the primary motive of this attack was anti-Muslim hatred as opposed to Christian fundamentalism. So this idea, why don't you blame Christianity when there's an attack like this? Because Christianity is not the main ideology. That's why. That is different from Islamist attacks, where Islamic fundamentalism is very clearly the ideology. Now, like I say, with this particular case in London, Ontario, it's ongoing. It might be revealed that this guy was getting into some who knows? It's going to be revealed. He should be charged with terrorism and he should serve the maximum sentence available. Canada obviously doesn't have the death penalty, but I think he should never be released. You know, he's brutally killed a family of four people. It's an awful thing to do. Um, and it is right that this is called a terrorist attack. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a workplace shooting or something like that. This was a terrorist attack. But even, that terminology, when we see mass shootings in the US, very often you'll hear people say, oh, why is that not called terrorism? It's certainly terrorism for the victims, but wording does matter. The definition of terrorism is an act of political violence. So if you have, for example, someone who has a workplace dispute, and particularly in America with the availability of guns, and they decide to, open fire at the workplace, it's not terrorism in the same way as a bombing or an ideological attack. It doesn't make it any less terrible, but that's a spree shooting as opposed to a terrorist incident. The reason why America's many spree shootings are not called terrorist attacks is because most of them don't have a wider political goal. They tend to be workplace disputes, tend to be disgruntled lovers, they tend to be, um, there's a range of factors, but with some exceptions like the Orlando attack and a few others, most of them are not ideologically motivated in that sense. This is extremely important, and I think most people don't understand this. They just think, oh, all violence should be treated as being the same ideology. Well, it's not. It's just not. Every act of violence should be condemned. Every act of violence should be seen for the appalling thing it is. But this concept, oh, why don't we blame Christianity in the same way as Islam is blamed? It's very, very manipulative, and this is why it ignores the very unique issue of Pan-Islamist extremism. Now, when was the last time there was a terrorist attack and the attacker shouted out, uh, Jesus, God live, long live Jesus? As in, you hear Islamist attacks, Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest. So there is absolutely a religious component to Islamic fundamentalism, to Islamic extremism. These hideous terror groups that are operating, particularly across West Africa right now, Boko Haram and the like, supposedly the leaders died, but that's unconfirmed. They are specifically acting with an agenda to expand an Islamic caliphate. That is a stated goal, So you can't say don't blame Islam. You can't say Islam's got nothing to do with that. That is their stated goal. So one of the most infuriating things I find with this subject of pan-Islamism is the dishonesty of those who won't even acknowledge it exists because they're so hung up. If they're Muslims, it's about pride. Oh, we don't want Islam to have anything to, they're more concerned about the reputation to Islam than being honest about the ideology that's at play. Um, Now, granted, you will get some conservatives who will say, oh, this guy was a lone nut regarding the attack in London, Ontario. He was a lone nut, he should be treated with mental illness, and they'll deny that there is a problem with the far right. I say they're just as wrong. I think ideology needs to be acknowledged. So, to those who say there isn't a problem with far right extremism, there is. We have seen attacks in New Zealand, in Canada twice, in Norway, so there has been examples of far-right extremism. However, they're still on a smaller scale than the thousands and thousands who are killed every year from Islamic extremism. And it infuriates me that you have people in denial about this. You cannot tell me a group like Boko Haram or Daesh or Al Shabaab or any of those other groups have nothing to do with Islam. Stop lying. Stop lying. It's an insult to the victims. When you have gunmen in the mall in Kenya a few years ago who were literally going through their victims, establishing who was a Muslim and who wasn't, what you have there is actually Islamic supremacy at work, and it needs to be seen as such. So this idea that if a suspect is white, they're treated differently is just not true. Timothy McVeigh was charged of terrorism and he was executed for terrorism. He was white. Brenton Tarrant was charged with terrorism. Anders Breivik was charged with terrorism. In the UK, David Copeland was charged with terrorism. So it's just not true to say that because a suspect is white, they're given special treatment in these sort of cases. The real question is what is the ideology now? If you have someone who happens to be a Muslim and they're involved in a spree shooting because they had an argument with the girlfriend, and they are venting frustrations, and they're in the United States where guns are so widely available, that might not be an Islamist attack. That might be a spree shooting. So I say in every incident, you need to know what the context is, what is the known information about the suspect, what ideology are they into, if any, what was the purpose of the shooting, if they're still alive, if they've been questioned. All the details have to be presented and considered. But this idea that when we get these sort of hate crime attacks, And I think it's safe to say that was a motivation. A Muslim family was targeted. Um, in those sort of incidents, you get people who latch on and say, "Oh well, why don't white people blame all white people, or why don't we blame Christians?" Well, why would you? Unless the attacker was explicitly saying he was doing it in the name of Christianity, why would you blame Christian fundamentalism? Um, that's the difference. When you have Islamist attacks, it is very, very explicitly a stated goal within those attacks. That's the difference. It doesn't mean one's worse than the other. Still acts of violence, although I do contend that Pan-Islamism kills many, many more people than far-right extremism. But you get this deception from Muslims who want to save face because they don't want to be honest. They don't want to accept that there is a problem in Islam with violence. There very clearly is. But you also get it from left-wing non-Muslims who get politically correct because they think, oh, you can't blame Islam, because they're more hung up about not offending a faith than being honest about the extremism within that faith. And I think it is I think it's morally cowardly. I've no respect for it. But more than that, it will not help to solve any problems. You can't begin to address a problem if you don't recognize the ideology. And, there's, as it stands, there is not the same level of threat from far right extremism as there is from Islamic extremism. And if we're being crude about it and going by mortality, Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic extremism kills far, far, far more people than far right extremism. That's just the reality. And if you don't believe me, look at the number of conflicts in the world that have Pan-Islamism as at least one component. There's a few exceptions. The Mexico drug war has got nothing to do with that. But many of the conflicts in Africa, certainly in the Sahel region, many of the conflicts in the Middle East, um, insurgency movements in Southeast Asia, Islamic fundamentalism is a very, very real and worldwide problem. And denying that won't help the victims. I mean, devout Muslims, I get they don't want the likes of Boko Haram to be associated with their faith. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. You cannot, for example, say that the Crusades of the Middle Ages had nothing to do with Christianity because they were explicitly about spreading Christianity. So I get really frustrated with the dishonesty. Now, I'll close with this. You will have Muslims who will get into the theology of it. They'll say, "Oh, these Boko Haram fighters have never really read the Quran, or they're distorting the surahs, or something like that." But this is the thing: Islam's a major world faith, so who gets to determine what is true and what isn't? It could well be that the extremists are actually practicing the honest version, and the moderates, or rather those who don't want to be honest about the extremism. Um, they're practicing another interpretation. When you have a faith of 1.6 billion people, the claim that there's no extremists is pathetic. It's a pathetic claim because it's just so unfeasible. The idea that you have so many people and they're all decent Muslims. I actually would call it Islamic supremacy. If you're a Muslim and you're saying Boko Haram and Daesh and Al Shabaab have nothing to do with Islam, well then who are they? Are you saying they're atheists? Are you saying they're um you know, it's time to be honest. Um what I would say to Muslims is by all means denounce them. Um but don't think you're kidding anyone by saying they've got nothing to do with Islam. Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic extremism is part of Islam. And regarding what happened in London, Ontario, those who say that there's no issue with far right extremism are wrong. There has been a number of incidents in recent years, not as many as Islamic extremism, but for example, in Canada, this is the second deadly attack now in 5 years. The Quebec City mosque attack and now the London. So there is clearly a problem, and Canada's security services need to look into their database or whatever, find out if they have any information on other people who may have far right ideology. Like I say, in this particular case, the information is still trickling through. Like, he should absolutely be charged with terrorism. That's what it was. Um, that's my take. And I know it's maybe some of those positions are controversial, but I think they have to be said because I'm sick and tired of the manipulation whenever we see these sort of incidents. You get Muslims who are more concerned about the reputation of Islam than the fact a family of four people have been brutally killed. Um, they're getting into the whataboutery. Pathetic.